90% of sexual assaults on college campuses are committed by serial perpetrators who on average offend 6 times while in college. If we can connect those survivors, there's more likely to be accountability, and there's also more likely to be healing for the survivors. Sexual assault is one of the most underreported crimes. Less than 10% of survivors on college campuses right now report. 13% of college students in the US are assaulted every year. That's about 2.5 million people. While it's mostly women, men are also assaulted, and trans and non-gender conforming students are also assaulted. And so it is a continually big issue. A lot of survivors blame themselves because the culture has been set up to be victim blaming. Grooming part is a significant part of that cycle, and we don't talk about that enough. Culture supports that part a lot of the time. There's a lot of justifications that perpetrators, particularly men, make that's completely supported by the movies they watch, by the music they listen to, by they intake. We need to address sexual assault from so many different angles of understanding what trauma is and how that impacts survivors. So it doesn't matter the intentions of the perpetrator. It matters the harm that the person that was on the receiving end of that assault happened.
An exploration of trauma, transformation, and triumph. Your healing starts here. And we are back with another episode of Through the Trauma Podcast. I am Amber, your host, and today I have with me a guest who has done a lot of things in the nonprofit sector. She is making a huge impact on college campuses all over the U.S., and she has a technology that she's going to tell us about that is helping cut back on violence and sexual assault. She's going to tell us more about this, but welcome, Miss Tracy DeTomasi. Thank you for being here today with us, Tracy.
Thanks so much for having me.
Yeah, it's such a pleasure. I know you were sharing a little bit with me before we jumped on here today, just about what you do and what your technology is. It's very impactful. Why don't you tell us a little bit about what this technology is?
Yeah, I would love to. Well, I run an organization called Kalisto, and I've been a licensed clinical social worker for 25 years now, and I've worked mainly in gender-based violence. And so this is definitely a passion of mine. And at Callisto, we are working to address sexual assault on college campuses. And 90% of sexual assaults on college campuses are committed by serial perpetrators who on average offend 6 times while in college. And so the premise is that if we can connect those survivors, there's more likely to be accountability, and there's also more likely to be healing for the survivors. And so we have built encrypted technology, and what that means is that it all gets encrypted prior to coming onto our server. So it's very highly secure. People cannot hack into it. It's for survivors to use if they want to find out if their perpetrator has harmed somebody else. So if the person who has sexually assaulted them has harmed somebody else. And anybody in the US and its territories with a .edu email address has free access. And so if they have that .edu and they want to know if their perpetrator has harmed somebody else, they can enter into our matching system. And what they do is they enter in the state where the assault occurred. And that's because laws vary. Sexual assault laws and definitions vary by state. And they enter in a unique identifier of their perpetrator. So their perpetrator's social media handle, email address, phone number, however many things that they know. And that's what we use to match on. So if 2 people entered the same Instagram handle, let's say, there's going to be a match. They're not notified right away. It's not like a dating site. What happens is that we get notified, but we keep the survivor information and the perpetrator information encrypted. So we cannot see that information. And we don't allow ourselves to see that because those lists get shut down for defamation. So we're not just a warning list that people can sort through it all. What we then do is we assign that case to an advocate who's trauma informed and legally protected under confidentiality. And that advocate reaches out to the survivors separately. And that's when the survivors have a choice to make. They can choose to meet with this person and this advocate, or they don't have to. If they choose to meet with this advocate, then they tell what happened to them. And that's the first time they really have to explain what happened to them, because we know repeating a story about sexual assault can be re-traumatizing. And then what they do is get options. What's a potential criminal option, that criminal justice option you have, a civil justice option, Title IX, mental health options, whatever it is that that survivor needs, because so many times survivors have no idea what options exist for somebody who's been sexually assaulted. And then if it's safe to do so, and again, the survivor has another choice to make. If they want to connect with that other person or people who have matched, they have the choice to do so, but only if they want to. And then that advocate will work to connect those survivors, for those survivors to pursue healing or justice, whatever that means for them, whether that's reporting to law enforcement or not, or just going to seek counseling, or just talking with that other survivor. Again, it's whatever those survivors want to do on their own. And we really want to empower those survivors to make the best choice that's available for them. We do not report to police. We do not report to Title IX, and we do not report to HR or any other type of authorities. So we do not go after that perpetrator. We are really about connecting those survivors for them to make the decision. And we know that survivors who are empowered and learn from other survivors and connect and know that they're not alone are more likely to then go report. And sexual assault is one of the most underreported crimes. Less than 10% of survivors on college campuses right now report.
I could totally see that, because I think that a lot of times, especially in that age range, which I know that you guys work with people of all different ages, but especially in those college years, there's a second guessing of like, did I cause this? Is this something that was, maybe I was teasing this person, or maybe I was pursuing them and then I said no. Or what you have is it's a very amazing technology that I think is very needed. My question though is, how would you keep someone, say that you had a boyfriend girlfriend situation and the girlfriend just wanted to check in on the boyfriend to see if he had any sexual assaults, or like a background check per se? Could they do that?
They can't. And that's exactly why it's encrypted. And that's why we're not a list to be able to sort through. We're not that warning label, because a lot of times those lists get shut down for defamation. There are, Facebook groups of "Are we dating the same guy?" that do that. And some of them have gotten shut down and some of them haven't. And some of the people that have posted have done that as well. In the height of the beginning of the Me Too movement, there was a Google list, like a Google Forms or spreadsheet list that got circulated. And it was called I think it was called the Shitty Media Men. And it was about a warning list of these are guys in Hollywood that you need to stay away from. And it was up for like 12 hours or something like that. And it got shut down. And the creator of that list ended up having to pay somebody that was named on the list for defamation. And so that's not what we're doing. If a survivor wants to check and they put in their, like you said, their boyfriend or their girlfriend's name to see if they've been named on this list, one, somebody else has to put in that other unique identifier to match with them. And then we look into that first. We're making sure that it's not a false match. And then they have to agree to talk with somebody. And if that, when they talk to somebody, they're like, "I just wanted to know and he hasn't done anything to me," well, then we're not going to match them with the other person. There's a lot of factors along the way to make sure that it is. And again, we are not a reporting system, so we don't report anywhere. So if they're just looking to check on something, it's not going to harm the person that they're naming, because it's all protected under confidentiality. And they could do all of that in many other ways without using our system. And so it actually protects both the named perpetrator as well as the survivor. And again, we really talk about how we are not a warning list. We are really about survivor empowerment.
And when you're talking about like a perpetrator, that can be anyone, like it can be someone as another student, it could be a teacher-student relationship, it could be someone who just works on campus.
Correct. And they don't even have to be connected to the campus. It can be anybody that has sexually harmed you. And we don't define sexual harm for folks. We think that they should define it, because we are not necessarily operating under a legal definition of sexual assault. And so if it's a violation that you felt that somebody did and you want to know if they've done this to somebody else, of whether or not to report, you can do that. You can also have reported that person and still use our system. But the perpetrator, it can be anybody. If they are connected to campus, there's the more likelihood that there will be a match, just statistically speaking. But that perpetrator can be anybody. And we've actually had matches from survivors who live on separate coasts. So, we've got, they're in completely different opposite sides of the US, and they've still matched, because we know that survivors move after being assaulted. And we also know that perpetrators move after being accused of assault and continue to go on and assault people at other schools.
How long have you guys had this technology?
We've been working on some form of the technology for over 10 years. Jess Ladd, who is our founder, started this idea in 2013, which is just revolutionary. She's got an incredible TED Talk out there that I would highly encourage your audience to go listen to if they want to learn more. And she was assaulted on a college campus, and she reported it. the reporting was just as traumatic for her as the sexual assault was, or nearly as much. And so she wanted to solve this issue. And so we had created a different technology to start with. And we realized as in most technological things, that we needed to pivot. And so what we're doing now, we started to pilot in the fall of 2021. The pandemic definitely impacted our launch date because students weren't on college campuses in 2020, or most students weren't. So we launched to several campuses in 2021, and then we expanded access to anybody with a .edu in the fall of 2023. So this new technology, and with who has access to it, is still pretty new. And that's why we're really looking to spread the word, because we know that the the more people who know about it and the more people who are using it, the more matches that we'll get, and the more effective it is.
Well, I mean, that's an amazing piece of technology, I think, because I know that there is strength in numbers, and it's horrifying. Sexual assault is horrifying in and of itself. I've personally never had a personal attack on myself, but I've talked to a lot of people who have, and it's something that's much needed. And I think that it probably happens a whole lot more on college campuses than we know, because it does go unreported for so many instances. Is this something that you're seeing as you're working with people?
Absolutely. I mean, over the course of my career, I have talked with so many survivors, and there's so many things that have changed, but the statistics really haven't. 13% of survivor or 13% of college students in the US are assaulted every year. That's about 2.5 million people. And while it's mostly women, men are also assaulted, and trans and non-gender conforming students are also assaulted. And so it is a continually big issue. And I think that you mentioned something earlier that was really significant. Of a lot of survivors blame themselves because the culture has been set up to be victim blaming. And things like, how do you protect yourself from sexual assault? And we tell people to cover your drink, don't run at night, use the buddy system. And so as soon as you maybe got drugged at a bar, and you don't know that you got drugged at a bar, but you didn't cover your drink, you're like, well, maybe I drank too much. Maybe it was my fault. Maybe this, maybe that. And also, we think about so often that rape happens like as a stranger jumping out of the bushes, when 80 to 90% of survivors on college campuses know their perpetrator. And a lot of the times it is somebody that they're friends with, or they're dating, or they know, or are in a fraternity or sorority, or a coach or a mentor or a professor. And it's not this violent act, but it's also really traumatizing, because a lot of times survivors then don't trust their judgment, and they blame themselves, which is an amazing part of our technology, is just knowing that you're not alone. So we have a survivor testimonial on our website, and this person had gotten drunk at a party and thought they did the right thing, and that they had their boyfriend take them home. They woke up in the morning and they had been assaulted, and they blamed themselves for drinking too much. The boyfriend apologized and said, you know, I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to, all of the things. And they lived with that for a couple of years, thinking that they were the problem and that they did something wrong. They found a match in Callisto, and then also went on to find numerous people on their campus who had been assaulted by the same person. And in that moment, their healing changed. They recognized none of it was my fault. He did that to so many other people because he was looking to take advantage of somebody. We say, did they take advantage of you? And taking advantage is just a way to say in a different way that they assaulted you, and that they saw your weakness, and that weakness isn't your fault. They are looking for that. Those people that are harming you, are harming and sexually assaulting folks, and they're perpetrators. They're looking for that, and they exploit that. And that is part of that cycle of sexual abuse. And so the fact that just knowing that this person assaulted somebody else can really, really change that healing. I've talked with a good friend of mine, was raped by Jeffrey Epstein, 91, and she lived for decades with thinking she was the only one and that it was her fault. And the moment she began healing was when she saw an article in the Miami Herald, that put his picture up there. She didn't know his name. She just saw his picture, and she was like, that was the man that raped me. And her name is Jess Michaels. She also has an amazing TED Talk that I would highly recommend people listen to as well. And she talks about how that moment was so healing for her, because all of a sudden, all of the guilt, all of the shame, all of the self-doubt that so many survivors go through. Most survivors, I would say, have some level of that, just faded away to some level. And then she could really start healing when she realized I wasn't the only one. And I think that's really the power of connecting survivors. And we also saw that in the Me Too movement, like perpetrators were started to held accountable. Survivors got a voice for Me Too when they could say Me Too. And then that was when people started connecting all the dots. And what became, what were open secrets in Hollywood started to finally get addressed because that shift in power changed. And sexual assault is all about power and control. It's rarely, if ever, about sex.
So let's divulge into this just a little bit, because when you have sexual assault, there's a spectrum. There's like most violent, gruesome sexual assault, and then there's this sexual assault like what you described, where you have the boyfriend that takes the girlfriend home and kind of takes advantage of her and is like, I'm so sorry. And, and then she's kind of like, I'm sure this is the thing that I've learned about trauma, is that trauma affects everybody differently. So
Absolutely.
you're looking at multifaceted people that have had different experiences, different baggage, different things that they're carrying throughout their lives. And then they get to this point where some people can handle that trauma a little bit better, where other people, it's like life altering, like threatening. They go into depression and they have suicidal ideations, and it's just like, it's crippling. And so it doesn't matter where you're at on the spectrum, and it doesn't really matter how you handle it, because you could have someone that handles something over on the more violent side a little bit better even than someone that handles it over here. But is there some type of education that you guys do that kind of informs people of like, hey, this is what sexual assault is. This is what it looks like. If you've experienced this, like, or if you're even in question, if this is a question, like, call us, talk to someone. I guess I'm asking, like, in those initial steps, how can someone navigate that?
Yeah, I think that's a really great question, and we do a lot of education on our social media platforms, particularly Instagram, about that because, especially when you're 18 to 22, you don't really know what that sexual assault is, and like I said before, you think about it as that violent spectrum, but trauma can impact you no matter how little or small that is. Some people, as you kind of mentioned, can be violently raped and not experience PTSD. And other people who can be more coerced can experience significant levels of PTSD. And there's a variety of reasons for that. One thing that we like to educate people on is about being an ally, because and how do you respond to somebody who says that they've been sexually assaulted? Because that can change the healing for a survivor. Most times, in many cases, survivors are not believed. They're blamed. What were you wearing? Well, did you drink too much? Did you flirt with him? What did you do that caused this? Well, you knew joining the fraternity was going to have a hazing incident that was sexual in nature. Like, you knew all these things. You knew going to that frat party was going to be a thing, And so if that's what they experience, that's sometimes harder, because then that creates the self-blame, and that can create that trauma piece, and they don't know what to do with it. Or they blame themselves, and so they don't think that they've experienced sexual assault, but that your body still remembers it, and the trauma is still there, whether you pretend it is or not. And so we definitely try to educate people, and I definitely do talks around the country with college students, with schools, with parents a lot of the times, to educate them on how to believe survivors, and just start by believing. If somebody tells you they've been assaulted, the first thing to do is say, are you okay, and what do you need from me? And I believe you. Like, that can be the most important thing, rather than trying to figure out how this could happen, because it can happen to anybody. It can absolutely happen to anybody. And I think that, in the case of domestic violence, a lot of the times we see our friends that go through a really toxic relationship. There might be a divorce, there might not be a divorce, but we can see the controlling things. We can see when they get isolated and when they pull back. And maybe we even see the bruises, or we see the financial control. A lot of times that's a lot more obvious, even though it's often very much hidden. And, with sexual assault, it's often hidden. Maybe it was a one-time event. Maybe it was several times by the same person, but it's often hidden, and sexual assault often happens behind closed doors. And so you don't even know what's happened. And so, you might accuse the perpetrator, and the perpetrator's first thing is to say, I didn't do it, either completely deny the incident altogether, or they might say, well, we had sex, but it was consensual. And then how do you improve that. And think that a big part of it is consent education. And another part of it is just positive sexuality and positive sex education. What do you like? What do you not like? In our society, we are so afraid to talk about sex. There's so much shame around sex, whether it's from religion, whether it's from just societal upbringing. And we need to get away from that because that is causing issues for people not to report and for them to not be able to have conversations or not to listen to their sexual partners or to even talk about what they like and don't like, to be able to set those boundaries and to be able to listen to your partner's boundaries. Because most of the time with sexual assault, you've probably set your boundaries. You've said something to set your boundaries and they were violated. And so, teaching, oftentimes consent education looks like, how do we teach women how to say no? But we really need to teach men how not to assault and how to listen to the no and how not to try to get a yes. So much education of boys is like, well, you can try to get a yes.
It's unfortunate because even as men, that's a common thing even as grown men. It doesn't stop in college. And the reason I say that, and I know you can't categorize an entire population, like you can't stereotype all men are that way, and I'm not saying that. But as someone in my 40s, I went through a divorce, and when I went through my divorce, like I didn't do a lot of dating, but mainly for that reason. Because when I would try to date, it was like there's always this push of that. And it's like I just didn't want the headache of it, to be honest with you. But I was so surprised going back into the dating world, and I would tell people if they were on the midst of divorce and it was like you could still work things out. I'm like, try to work things out because it's a jungle out here. Like, it's crazy. These people are crazy. And I don't know that when you get in your 30s, 40s, 50s, that you don't even have more baggage. So then you feel a little more entitled or a little more like, I don't care. But it's just it's a bad mix all around. And, I follow a lot of, porn is something that has been like, I've followed a lot. It breaks my heart. I watch a lot of the documentaries and the things where these women have, and men go into it, not realizing the violence, not realizing what the pressure it's going to put on them, not realizing how it's going to tear their lives apart, but it does. And the reason I bring that up is because you have people on college campuses and even in culture today where it's so prevalent. People are watching this and they get this idea that this violent kind of sexual exploitation is like a good thing and it's a turn on and it's heartbreaking. But when you watch some of that, like going back to what you had mentioned, when you watch some of these documentaries, this thing of, these girls knew what they were getting themselves into. They signed the papers to do the porn, but they didn't know they were going to be so abused. They didn't know what it was going to be like to be that abused in that situation. And it breaks my heart too that there's like a grooming that seems like it takes place. This is why I'm thinking what you're doing is so impactful because at at a young age, 19, 20, 21, when you're college age, you're very susceptible. So it's easy to get groomed by younger men or by older men. I think it's a big problem in our
It is.
culture today.
Yeah, when I first started out, I was a therapist for adolescent sex offenders. So I worked with boys, mostly boys, that had assaulted somebody, abused somebody, whether it was a sibling, a cousin, a family member, a friend, stranger, and talking to them about a lot of these things and how to change that cycle. And the grooming part is a significant part of that cycle. And we don't talk about that enough. And the culture supports that grooming a lot of the time, especially. So there's a lot of justifications that perpetrators, particularly men, make that it's completely supported by the movies they watch, by the music they listen to, by the porn they intake. And porn in and of itself is not bad if it was more consensual and everything, but it's so accessible now that one of the concerns is that we're not talking about it. Parents aren't talking about it. So a lot of kids are going into college at 18, haven't had a sexual experience. They've only seen porn and they think that's what sex is. And it's not. Porn is acting. No, it is acting. It is for camera. It is for the pleasure of the person watching. It is not for the pleasure of the people involved. And that is not sex. So there's a lot of increased in strangulation because something that they're watching in porn. And so boys or men think that women like that, when rather than asking, hey, are you into this? No, I'm not. Yes, I am. Maybe, but not yet. Not today, whatever. And they're not getting that answer because they think that that's what they like. And I've always said that, you know, porn is really to like the Harlem Globetrotters to the NBA, from like, well, porn to sex, where it's a game, it's a show, it's not actual reality. And I think that is so much of an issue. And I've kind of lost the question that you asked.
I didn't really ask a question. We were just talking. But I think to clarify, like when I was speaking about this, the documentaries and things that I've been watching has to do with the performers. I follow a lot of this on social, and social feeds you whatever the algorithm. So I watch a lot of this, and it just breaks my heart for the people that have went into that industry not really knowing, and the evil of the producers that they know. They
There's
know.
a lot of control. Well, they're
Want.
impressionable. They're promising girls and women different things. There's a lot of pressure, and a lot of times women are socialized not to say no and to people please, or we don't know how to say no, or when we've said no, it hasn't been respected. So there's a lot of grooming that goes on in that industry. That you can see that in the films. You can see that obviously in the documentaries even more so, where it's really pointed out.
But I think the big problem is that the influence that it's making on our youth and on our culture just in general. Because now, revisiting what we've already mentioned, which is this idea that this is what sex is supposed to look like. I have a 13-year-old son. I hope that he's not looked at porn, but as to be real, you just don't know the culture that we live in. On social media, I was horrified to see that even on TikTok, you could search it like a code word and then go in there and search the tagged photos or whatever. And it was like full blown porn. And I was like, I was horrified. I was like, if I'm seeing this, like, has my kids seen this? And it's just, I think when you take an adolescent young man that sees this and then they think, or even if they don't see like the full blown porn, but like you mentioned, the music that they're listening to. The music these days is like full blown porn, in my opinion. It's like pretty nasty because, again, going back to what you said, people aren't talking about it, and we have to be able to talk about it. But there is so much shame surrounding it. And why, as a culture, have we moved into this place where we talk about it from the most nasty, perverted sense, but we can't talk about it from a healthy sense? It's like, oh no, we're not going to touch that.
Yeah.
Where did we get disconnected is what I'm curious
I
about.
wish I fully knew. I'm sure that there's probably been studies about that. I do know that, religion is a big piece of that. And then again, just society of controlling women, like all, if you look back at a lot of the laws and just around women's empowerment in general, um, excuse me, it all intertwines. It's not just one thing. It's part of the culture. It's part of, I mean, if you look at movies from the 80s, you can look at Star Wars. There are moments in Star Wars where basically like Harrison Ford kept saying, I'm going to kiss you. And Carrie Fisher, Princess Leia, said no, 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 and then they made it, oh well, it's romance once he finally kissed her. And you're like, but was it? Because she kept saying no and he kept going at her. And so I think that we need to be having conversations. And I think that, I'm also in my 40s. We weren't taught how to have these conversations. We weren't taught them as parents. I'm not a parent, but I have nieces and nephews that I end up talking to about this because I'm comfortable with it, because I've done it for years and I know how to do it. But we have to get comfortable to talk to our kids about this, because the likelihood of your son or most 13-year-old boys of finding porn and or searching for porn is very high. And so it's like, okay, well, so you saw that. Let's not put the shame to say, no, don't look at that again. Because, what 13-year-old, you tell them not to do something and they're going to do it, like in anything. But it's about saying, well, what did that make you feel? What do you think? What do you think that woman went through in that video? How do you think that this is? Acknowledging they're actors. Are movies real? Like, and compare it to what they do know of, like, oh, well, no, those movies aren't real. Are those Avenger movies real or whatever? Well, then if that's not real and this is acting too and they're filming it, this is not what your experience is going to be like when you have sex. And talking about sex, there's a lot of really great books for teenagers that explain the actual human parts and the names for human things. So many people don't even want to name body parts, and to children. And I think that it's really, really important to start at a young age, because we can start with consent at a very young age that's age appropriate. It's not necessarily sexual. It's about, do you want, can I have your toy or not? Yes or no. You say no, I don't take your toy. And so it's just a willingness to have these conversations, because and we need to address sexual assault from so many different angles of understanding what trauma is and how that impacts survivors, of understanding how the culture impacts perpetrators, also impacts survivors' decisions to report or not report. Even with understanding trauma, up until I think the early 90s, most sexual assault laws, you had to have fought back in order for it to be considered rape. Well, now we know from trauma, freeze is a response that most people do. And so when you freeze, you're not fighting back because you're terrified that you're going to die. And even if it's not reality, that is something that your body just automatically goes into. So understanding trauma has changed the laws. We have a culture now where there's the manosphere, and there's things coming out of the manosphere that are like, your body, my choice. Well, what is that teaching men in this male loneliness epidemic? And a lot of it's because we're not talking about it. We're not talking about the mental health of boys, and we need to. And we focus sexual assault so much as a women's problem when really, we talk about it as being violence against women. Really, it's Jackson Katz started talking about this years ago. It's men's violence against women, because 98% of perpetrators are men, no matter who the victim is. And so, again, I think that we really need to continue to have open conversations about this. And so many people just don't want to talk about it because of trauma, because of what they've experienced, or because they don't believe it, or they don't see it, or they want to continue to justify their own actions. And everybody knows multiple survivors in their lives. And also, everybody knows multiple perpetrators in their lives, and we need to wrestle with that. And so, again, thank you for letting me come on your show to really talk about all this, because it is extremely important.
I have a question about when you were working with the adolescents and even now in your current work. Do you find that a lot of the perpetrators that come up in this, that they have also been sexually assaulted? Or do you know percentages around that?
There are a lot that have been, and I think that, when I worked with the adolescents, all of them had experienced some kind of abuse, whether it was sexual or physical. However, there's a saying of hurt people, but not all hurt people hurt people. So if you look at offenders, you can see that a lot of them have been assaulted themselves or experienced some kind of trauma themselves. But if you look at people who've experienced trauma, most don't go on to offend. Right. And so you can understand that they've been assaulted from a treatment perspective, but accountability is still necessary to stop the behavior. And so when I've talked about the work that I've done in the past, a lot of people are like, oh, well, you're being too empathetic to the perpetrator. I'm not being empathetic to the perpetrator. I'm always thinking about the survivors and how to stop this behavior. And part of that is coming through understanding their own trauma around it. But that's the work of the perpetrator. And if the perpetrator refuses to do that, then that's an issue. And there's a spectrum of offending, just like there's a spectrum of victimization. There are predators and there are perpetrators. There's some men that, and I don't hesitate saying this because I know that there's going to be victims and survivors out there that are listening that have already shut this episode off because they're upset with what I've already said. But I think that everybody's experience is very different. There are some people that I have worked with that have perpetrated that you just tell them, like, look, this was not okay, and here's why. And they are, my goodness, I didn't realize that. And that's it. Then you have some that are like really, really awful people. It's the Epsteins, it's the Weinsteins. But there are so many people in between. But no matter what the perpetrator is like, the experience to the victim of being traumatized is the same, and that's what matters. So it doesn't matter the intentions of the perpetrator. It matters the harm that the person that was on the receiving end of that assault happened. And that's why we are working with the survivors first. Our main goal is to empower survivors. Our second goal is to hold perpetrators accountable. And our third goal is to create everlasting change in the criminal and civil justice systems and policies and stuff to be able to make these changes so we understand sexual assault better.
Yeah, and I think that's vital. And I also think that, as an empath myself, I can say that I resonate a lot with victims as far as like the heartbreak there is tremendous, and I feel sorry for anyone that's had to deal with that or go through that and carry the weight and the trauma of that. But I also think that if you look at, perpetrators, or you look at someone who's caused these things, while a lot of people would say, well, there's no mercy there. They did what they did. They should be punished for it, and they should. I'm not advocating that they shouldn't, but if we can't if we can't try to provide them some type of help to not go and do these things again, then what stops them? Is a little bit of time in jail going to stop them? Is fines and fees going to stop them? A smack on the hand? I don't think those things are going to create real change. What's going to create real change is getting them the help and the therapy that they need. Of course, you have to want that.
And that's why we don't define accountability for survivors. Accountability can mean whatever it is that they feel like they get accountability, because some survivors go through the criminal justice system, their perpetrator gets locked up for decades or life, and they still don't feel like they have justice. Other ones feel like they have justice after being able to just have this perpetrator acknowledge what they did. And because so many people know their perpetrators, a lot of times they don't report because they don't want that person to go to jail. And so again, we make it a choice, and we know some survivors are like, jail, that's it, absolutely, and I fully respect that, absolutely. And that is a choice that hopefully they get justice in that. Unfortunately, our criminal justice systems don't work very well. For most people, don't get justice in that kind of capacity. But we want there to be more options than just the criminal justice system, for a variety of reasons, because we know that that's what survivors want and what survivors need. And we need to interrupt that harm. We need to interrupt that harm. And like you said, whether it's treatment, whether it's jail, whether it's assessment, we need to continue to bring that perpetrator into the conversation. Because that's how we're going to solve this issue. We as women, if we could solve this issue, we would have done so decades ago. There's been a lot of women that have been doing this work for way longer than I have, and we would have solved it. But it takes men to interrupt other men. It takes men to call out bad behaviors, and it takes men who have assaulted to own up to what they did and to be accountable and to experience like external accountability as well, not just from like internal accountability, but whether it's losing a job, whether it is going to treatment, whether it is going to jail, whether it is losing your spot on a basketball team or a football team, whatever that accountability is.
Do you have experience with like long-term abuse or long-term perpetrators, people that maybe they're in a relationship and there's like a lot of sexual coercion, but the abused person stays and then eventually gets to the point where they can't stay any longer? Or would this technology work for someone in that situation or no?
Yeah, I mean, it could. And I ran a domestic violence shelter for a long time. So I've seen that, and I know why survivors don't leave. I know why they stay. I know how hard it is to leave, and how dangerous it can be to leave. And if they have a .edu, they could use our technology to find out if somebody's harmed somebody else. If they've been in a long-term relationship with that person, the likelihood of a match is going to be smaller. So that's where it doesn't work as well with that population, but it doesn't say that they couldn't use our system to see if that's the case, especially after they end the relationship. If that person goes on, particularly with a EDU like academic community, they could definitely match.
And I've I got a lot of questions for you. This is the last one, I think, though. Right now in our culture, there's a very popular court case going on right now. I try not to watch a lot of that just because it's heartbreaking to me to watch. But do you think that when this stuff is publicized, like especially broad spectrum publicized, like it's all over everything, all over social media, all over television, all over the news, is this something that helps situations because it's bringing awareness to it? Or is it something that hurts these situations because it's kind of teaching perpetrators the ins and outs of like, this
I
is
think
normalizing it?
it's a good question and a complex one. I think perpetrators learn on their own, and it's going to be whatever it is for them. So I don't think that that's the issue. I think it can be really empowering to survivors to see themselves in these high profile cases, to learn about it, because that's the time that we talk about it. However, I also think it can be really triggering for people because so many people don't understand trauma. So they comment, and the comment sections can be really awful. And when survivors read them, they continue to self-blame. When they're like, why did she stay? Why did she leave? I would have done this. I would have done this. You don't know what you would have done, because trauma, when you have that fight, flight, freeze, or fawn, you don't know what your body's going to do in that situation at all. And you don't know that level of coercion. We sometimes think about like sexual assault is a one-time event, and a lot of times it's that grooming that we spoke about earlier, that it's not that. It's a whole relationship and a whole coercion, and so many people have known about all of these high profile things, right? And so it is not just the perpetrator's issue, it is the whole ecosystem around all of that. And so I think that one of the things I would say is that if you're questioning why a survivor would stay or how that could even happen and it seems too much, don't say it in the comment section. Don't say it to your friends and family, because that celebrity is in that high profile case. They're not going to ever know you said that. But you know who is? Your friend, your cousin, your family member who has experienced it, and you are no longer a safe person for them. And now you have damaged that person that you love because they're seeing your comments. And I think that's like the worst thing. We've had people DM us on our Callisto account on Instagram to say, I love what you do. I love a lot of your content. When people get in the comment section and start blaming survivors, I can't handle it. So I have to unfollow you, because that is so damaging to survivors. And again, that's where the PTSD comes in. That's where the long standing trauma can come in, of it's not just one thing. It's all of these different external messages that you're getting about what you did and what you could have done. And you feel defensive of like, but no, you don't get it. And you make me feel crazy. And maybe I say one thing and you're like, but why did you keep going back? But I get it. I got it. I get it. We've all stayed in toxic relationships. We've all stayed in relationships too long. We've all done things that we never would have thought we would do. And that's no different. And the survivors cannot control what happened to them. The only person that's responsible is the perpetrator in the end. That's it.
Yeah, I totally agree with you there. And I think we've got a lot of work as culture to do, but you're definitely doing your part here by creating such an amazing piece of technology that, there are strength in numbers. And I think people, when they see, well, we see it in celebrity cases as well. The Epstein, did I say that right? you
Epstein,
know,
yeah.
where people weren't coming out, like your friend. And then all of a sudden they see that there's multiple. You had, what was it, Bill Cosby when he was accused, and then there's like multiple women coming out. So there is strength in numbers, and I think what you're doing is amazing, and I love it. I want to be in full support of that, and get the word out there to people that really need it, because it's so vital that you have a safe space. And I think, my heart behind this podcast, and probably your heart behind this and all of your work and your entire career, has been providing that safe place for people. And it's much needed. I appreciate you so much, Tracy, and just thanks for coming on and sharing everything with us today. But before we close up, I do want you to tell my audience how they can get in contact with you and how they can get their hands on Callisto.
Yeah. So go to our website, which is projectcallisto.org. You can follow us on Instagram at Kalisto. We're also pretty active on LinkedIn. We do not have a TikTok yet, but we will get one soon. And yeah, check out our website if you want to contact me or contact my staff. Contact@projectcallisto.org is the email address. We read all of them, so it doesn't go into like the abyss of some other emails like that. But would love to reach out. Would love to be able to do a demo for people, especially if they're on college campuses. We always want to talk to students who we have Callisto ambassadors that can volunteer to get involved, and to spread the word on their campus, which has been really effective. We've got so many that are amazing across the country. But yeah, just check us out on those places. And if you have a .edu, sign up for an account.
And spell Callisto for us for those who are listening.
Yeah, Callisto.
And that I will put all that information in the show notes as well. But some people are listening and they want to gather that information quickly. So if you had one big takeaway for us, like one thing you'd really want to leave with my audience, what would that be?
I think it would be to the survivors out there that are listening, and that you're not alone, and everybody experiences trauma differently. And so however you're experiencing it is the way that you're going to experience it. And it's difficult, but if you haven't gotten the help that you need, there are people that want to help and that we need to keep talking about it. And you don't need to be in silence if you don't want to be. Some people don't want to share their story, and that's okay as well. But that there is support out there, and there is hope, and there's healing in a variety of ways. And we are just one way in the ecosystem of helping survivors be empowered.
I love that. So if you're interested in Callisto, be sure to check that out. Check out Tracy and all the work that she's doing there on college campuses all over. Just join in this fight and support with us in this fight to get rid of, or at least decrease, the amount of sexual assault that's happening on campuses all over the U.S. Tracy, thank you again for coming on, for sharing this last hour, sharing with us all of your expertise. I appreciate you so much.
Thank you so much for allowing me this opportunity.
Hey there, friend. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for spending this time here with us on Through the Trauma podcast. Your presence means more than you know. If this episode has spoke to you or gave you hope or made you feel just a little bit less alone, then I would love it if you would take a second, subscribe, leave a review, and share it with someone who truly needs to hear it. Every share, every comment, every listen, it all helps our message get out and reach those who truly need it the most. Healing happens inside of a community, and together we are breaking the silence and creating space for transformation. Thank you so much for being a part of this journey. Until next time, be gentle with yourself. You are not alone.